Hi, everyone. So I'm here to tell you about three of your options for your graphic novel book choices. So remember, you want to think about which book that not only interests you, what you think is interesting, but also what's going to be a good fit for you, what's not going to be too easy or what's not going to be too hard. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of these three books that I have for you today, and hopefully some of them spark your interest. So the first one I want to share with you is called The Best We Could Do. And it's exciting because it's a memoir. And you might remember a memoir means that it's a story of someone's life. And the author who also did the drawings in this graphic novel is T. Bowie. And this is her name right here. And she tells the story of her family in Vietnam and their hardships traveling inside Vietnam and out of Vietnam during times of conflict. This is her as a child right here. The cool thing about this is to remember is that all of the stories are true and based on her life and her family's experiences in Vietnam, which is exciting. And it's a little bit of a longer one, but it's, again, not terribly long. All of our choices are rather short. But the setting changes throughout the story because it starts with T and her life and currently what's happening. But then she goes and discovers more about her family, and she tells the stories of her grandparents dealing with French control of the country Vietnam. Then she tells the stories of her parents dealing with the Civil War in Vietnam. And you see lots of beautiful images of how the violence has impacted her family in like the short term and in the long term. So we learn a lot about her parents and how they lived in Vietnam and experienced the violence that was erupted due to North Vietnam, which are communists, fighting against South Vietnam, which is supported by the United States at the time, all happening in like the 1970s. So you get to learn about what it's like for her and her family, and she's a young child during some of these moments, traveling and hiding from violence. It also talks a lot about what it means to be close to somebody and how relationships are built. And you'll get a little bit of a view on different perspectives and different relationships. If you are somebody who likes history, you like to learn about different conflicts and like to read about real stories, then you're definitely going to enjoy this one. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was very clever and very fun to read and also very beautiful to look at. And the images are really nice. If you are also more of a mature reader and can handle a mature book, then I recommend this one as well. Definitely a mature read. So great story, great book. Really fun, and it's called The Best We Could Do. Our second option is called The Unwanted. The Unwanted is actually not about Vietnam, it's about Syria. So all of our choices are about different countries and different refugees. So this one focuses on more general stories of Syrian refugees, which means it's more recent. So it takes place in about 2011 to today. So in 2011, there was a big protest that happened called the Arab Springs in many countries in the Middle East. They were upset that this leader named Assad in Syria was controlling the country and making it kind of unsafe for people. So what they did was there's massive protests in the streets, but the problem was that the leader Assad is very violent, and he took out all the protesters with violence. And the interesting thing is it didn't stop. Protesters kept coming and coming and coming, but the violence became too much. And all the bombing caused people to flee and run away from Syria to try to find safety. So this story just talks about the general experience of Syrian refugees leaving Syria to go to different countries like Greece and Turkey, where they try to find safety. And it talks about how hard it is to travel from Syria to safe countries, It talks about smugglers and how they try to trick and make money. It talks about how there's so many people leaving that the new countries sometimes shut the borders and wouldn't let them in because it's too many refugees to take in. You're going to see what it's like to be hiding from different police, to experience what it's like to have a capsized boat, hunger, walking, and you also will experience the people who you may have heard of called ISIS, who were fighting the refugees as well. So this is more of a general story about Syrian refugees escaping and trying to find safety. All in all, you should know that this war and the Syrian refugee crisis is still happening today. And there were 5.6 million refugees that were displaced or left Syria due to the violence that is still happening today. So if you want a more general, smaller read about big ideas, then this would be a good one for you. This is also a great option that I enjoyed reading, a little bit of a shorter one. And again, not about a specific character, but more general stories. All right, the next one that I have for you to share with you is called When Stars Are Scattered. One thing about this book that I want to share with you is if you ever read Roller Girl, it's by the same author. So if you liked Roller Girl, you might like this story as well. This one is about a medium read, I would say, in terms of length and challenge. It's also based on a true story. So Omar Muhammad, who's one of the authors, is actually a main character in the story, and he helps tell the story of his experience. Now, this setting is, again, different. It takes place in a refugee camp that we're familiar with from reading A Long Walk to Water. It takes place in a refugee camp called Ifo, which is in Kenya. And it's based on the lives of these two boys here, Hassan and Omar, who are both from Somalia, which is a different country in Africa. And they escaped, and you will eventually get to hear their story of why they had to leave and what caused them to leave in the story. And you hear the story from Omar, who tells about his life in a refugee camp with his brother who has a disability, Hassan. And Omar takes care of his brother. He does all the chores. He does a lot of work to survive. They have a kind of like foster mother who takes care of them as well. But this book takes place fully, mostly, in a refugee camp. So you get to learn what it's like to live in a refugee camp as a boy. And time passes, and they spend many, many years in the refugee camp in Ifo in Kenya. It's about how they build relationships with others, how they experience people trying to move to America from the refugee camp. And it, as you can see, is very beautiful, lots of colorful images. And it's really a deep dive into these kids' lives and how they grow up and learn to be who they are in refugee camps. And it does excel into the future where Omar does become older. They both become older, about 17 years old. And some good and some not so good things happen to them. So you get to see a lot of different experiences of what it might be like. And again, this is based on a true story as well. So if you want to see what it was like for these two boys who lived in a refugee camp, this would be a really great choice for you. And I just want to show you before I move on, at the very end, it does show you and give you the kind of backstory about the two boys. Here's a real picture of them because they are real people. So great choices for you in my video here. I just want to quickly recap for you that the one I just told you about is called When Stars Are Scattered, and it's about the two boys in a refugee camp in Kenya. Then we had The Unwanted, which is about a general stories about Syrian refugees. And then the first one we had, The Best We Could Do by Thi Bui, who tells the story of Vietnam and her family's experience being refugees moving from Vietnam to safety. So these are your three options, and I hope that they spark your interest.